Hey everybody, this is Cameron from Obnoxious Anonymous. Today I'm once again joined by Joel Bocko. You know him from his blog, Lost in the Movies, and the last time he was on this podcast, I believe in June, we kind of talked about Twin Peaks and everything, and at the time we had no idea that there was going to be a continuation of the series coming in 2016, so he's back here to discuss some of the recent questions that's been posed on this podcast, so it's great to have him back. How's it going, Joel?
It's going great. Thank you, Cameron. Glad to be back under nice circumstances that neither of us suspected.
I never would have thought in a million years that we would get a continuation, only because Lynch was so adamant that it was never going to happen.
I think everybody thought that.
Well, especially, and now we find out that for the last 3 years, they were planning it,
Yeah, that's the subterfuge of all this is just fantastic. Like, first of all, that whole Between Two Worlds thing that he did with the Palmer family, I watched it and I was like trying to decode the cryptic, what does she mean? There's still many faces, blah, blah, blah. And then, like, lo and behold, it's basically just a teaser for 2016. Like, that was basically what he was going for with that. So he pretty much pulled a fast one on everyone. Well done.
Which is funny because I didn't even want to watch that Between Two Worlds. Well,
now it's like essential.
Now it's essential. I mean, because I watched the interview portion, not with them playing the characters. Because I saw, I think about 20 seconds of it, and I thought, this is too uncomfortable and weird. And is this what it's come down to, where we're gonna just interview people as characters in an LA restaurant? I can't do this. Now that I know that it's just kind of like sort of an appetizer for maybe things to come.
Yeah.
Okay, now I can accept it. Do you know what I mean? But I didn't want it.
Yeah.
I didn't want it to be a substitution for.
You didn't want it to be the last thing you ever saw of Twin Peaks.
Correct. So let's talk about some of these questions that you emailed me about. I'm sure we're going to get into a bunch of other stuff, but you really want to talk about Mary Sweeney, who edited portions of the series and Fire Walk with Me.
I mean, I should qualify that by saying I don't actually have anything I'm just curious. You mentioned last time that he was at an interesting point in his life when he made Fire Walk with Me, and then all of his whole filmmaking style kind of changed. He did the dual narratives, he did the female heroes, and it was right around the time that he started going out with Mary Sweeney. Now, of course, she became his editor at that time, and actually, this is what kind of got me thinking about it the other night. Someone mentioned something I'd read before, which is her first official episode as like an editor of Twin Peaks was episode 14, which in itself is like a huge turning point in Lynch's career. He's forced to reveal the killer. He doesn't want to. It's like the darkest thing he's done, the most pessimistic. So it's kind of that's something that I feel like I would love to know more about, is just what role she really played in his like creative transition into those later films. But I mean, I brought it up, but I don't know if there's actually anything to to dig into there. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
Well, it's interesting. A few years ago, I was talking with Jennifer Lynch at a film festival. Mm-hmm. And we got on the subject of Inland Empire. Mm. And I thought, this is, a girl, a woman, a filmmaker, whose dad is also a filmmaker. I thought she would have been like, oh yeah, that's my dad's film, and I said, what did you think of Inland Empire when you first saw it? And she said, honestly, all I could think of is, I wish Mary Sweeney had edited this.
Interesting.
And I was trying to figure out what that meant.
Yeah.
Because Mary Sweeney, and people don't realize how important an editor is. Because when you look at Blue Velvet and Wild at Heart and the pilot episode of Twin Peaks, Dwayne Dunham, that's a certain type of editing with David Lynch. Yes. Mary Sweeney took it to a different level, and I will argue maybe not always a better level, but but it's a different level, and a
very different feel to his films from Dwayne Dunham edited Wild at Heart, so and that feels kind of the beginning of a difference as well. But yeah, from Fire Walk with Me on, you get a real real difference.
And the fact that
from the earlier work,
and the fact that she co-wrote the Straight
Yep.
Story,
Yep.
you know,
and produced a bunch of his stuff too. I think didn't she produce Mulholland Drive?
right. And of course, you know, obviously we don't know what happened behind closed doors, but I think it's really interesting that they dated for over a decade, and then they got married, and then they got divorced within like 6 months.
Yeah, the sense I got, and again, I think I said this on the last one, so I don't want to be redundant, but from the biography, I think Beautiful Dark, it sounded like there was just, and you know, who cares, it's speculatory, but supposedly there was some kind of like, there was like a reason for it, just legal, I think. Like she wanted to be, if they were going to break up, she wanted to be his ex-wife instead of just ex-girlfriend, maybe for the kid's sake. I don't know. Again, totally speculatory, not really my business, but that was the sense I got. So, but yeah, that is interesting, is like they were creative partners, you know, obviously personal partners for like a decade and a half, during which his work had a very distinctive, different flavor to it. And I don't know, it's just interesting
because Dwayne Dunham
yeah.
never would have edited Lost Highway in the same way.
That's an interesting point. What do you feel about Lost Highway particularly was different?
I'm just saying that
the earlier works.
Lynch is somebody who is very, you know, he's an artist. He's a painter. He's he's somebody who feeds off the energies around him. So, like I said, if he was surrounded by a different crew, a different editor, the film would have been different.
Yeah.
You know,
that's a great point too, because I think, and that'll lead us, not that we should totally leave this part of the conversation, but that can also lead into the part where we talk about Lynch and Frost together. But people, you know, David Lynch, very much obviously a unique voice, unique vision, but you're totally right, especially with him. He's not like Stanley Kubrick, where you're kind of off in your world, you have your vision, nobody else can really tamper with it, and you're just doing your own thing, you know? He's somebody who very much feeds off the environment, very much so. And, yeah, I do think that's significant. I don't know what the total significance of it is, but...
Well, let's take let's take the Lynch-Frost relationship for a second. James and I, in other podcasts, we've talked about this, and just get your viewpoint on this. I think it's very interesting, and I know you are a big advocate and fan for Fire Walk with Me.
Yes.
And I mean, I am too. I really like the movie. I do recognize that there's some issues with it, but it's okay.
Yeah.
I still love it. I still love it.
It's a messy movie for sure.
But my feeling is, you can tell when you're watching it, and this is neither a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying. Yeah. You can tell Mark Frost had nothing to do with that script.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's totally Lynch taking over with Bob Engels probably transcribing. You know.
Well, that's another interesting thing, and we'll get into that too, because I don't want to split the conversation like 5 ways. But the Bob Engels thing too, we'll get into that in a moment. But Mark Frost, in Fire Walk with Me, totally agree. The one thing I will say that makes the movie interesting and not completely outside of the Twin Peaks series canon is the fact that he's working with elements that I'm pretty sure Mark Frost had more to do with conceiving of, which is basically the whole mythology, the idea of there being 2 lodges, the idea of basically how the inhabiting spirits kind of work, certain other things. I get the sense, and I've been getting this more recently, that Frost was actually probably more the moving force in defining the series mythology, whereas Lynch would come up with images and stuff like that, the one-armed man, Bob, the little man, the Red Room. But it was Frost who was kind of like, okay, there's this battle between good and evil going on, and, you know, the love versus fear and all this. So I think one thing I'm starting to notice about the series and the finale in Fire Walk with Me is that even when Frost isn't in the picture, you know, even when Lynch throws out the Black Lodge sequence in the script, or he goes off and does Fire Walk with Me with Engels, he's still kind of stuck with stuff that Frost either came up with or sort of led the way on. So that's something I'm sort of trying to dig into now. I think, you know, I mentioned I'm doing a video series on Twin Peaks where I'm just analyzing it, like, you know, not episode by episode, but like sort of section by section, 3 or 4 episode groups. And I think when I get up to the second season, which is the next thing I'm working on, or I should say the second part of the second season, I really want to try and dig into like where some of that stuff came from. The Dweller on the Threshold, the Black Lodge, the White Lodge, because I think from what I've gathered from Brad Dukes and other people like that, and John Thorne a little bit, it's really like Mark Frost mythology kind of, and then it's David Lynch figuring, how do I make this consistent with my own philosophy? And that's kind of where Firewalk with Me comes from, and I would argue, in a weird way, that kind of becomes where the other films come from as well. Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, and all that. I think Twin Peaks is really the first time you see David Lynch, other than Dune, I guess, where he's working with, pretty established property. Twin Peaks is where you really see him getting into, for the first time, like supernatural phenomena coexisting with something like the real world. It's not a total fantasy like Eraserhead. It's not a totally, physical world like Blue Velvet. It's something in between. So I think that's that. We're talking about how different collaborations changed Lynch as a filmmaker. I have a feeling that his work with Frost changed his approach to, sort of dealing with physical reality in the external world and the idea of supernatural phenomena, because and again, speculatory, but I get the feeling it wasn't necessarily his idea to make that stuff so explicit on the show. It seems like whenever he introduced it, it was very vague, and is this a psychic thing? Is it a psycho? Who is Bob hiding behind the couch? Is that just like a mental image of something? And then, you have Frost kind of making it a little more explicit. Well, there's this other world, these lodges, etc. So I don't know, kind of rambling, but that's something that I'm intrigued by.
I will say this.
Yes. Back to your point. Sorry.
No, because we're going to go off in a million directions here.
Sure.
Blue Velvet introduced Kyle MacLachlan having bad dreams.
Wait, doesn't Dune kind of do that though?
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying Dune as well. Elephant Man has some visions of the mom. Eraserhead, he goes into a dream world with the lady in the radiator.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
So, I think
the dreams are there.
I think what it was, too, is that Lynch is somebody who, goes with images and moods and finds the right dialogue to go along with it. What happened with Mark Frost, I think, is that he had never worked with a writer that was as literate as him. So
that's an interesting point. Yeah,
it's like when Terry Gilliam made Brazil, and you had Tom Stoppard writing the script.
I didn't even know. Okay, yeah, keep going.
And Terry Gilliam.
I don't know much about the making of Brazil.
Well, I'm just saying Tom Stoppard, the guy who made
absolutely.
Rosencrantz, Guildenstern Dead, amongst other many things.
You don't get much more literate than that.
So you have, if you can take someone that has the words of Tom Stoppard and then the images of Terry Gilliam, you have potentially a great film if the movie works, And I think that's what it was. I think that Mark Frost kept David Lynch from going too out there, but David Lynch took Mark Frost out of the police procedural world and into another world.
I think there's definitely some truth to that. I do think, and I think for a long time, I didn't really see the supernatural stuff as coming from Frost. It seemed to me like he was more bound by the realistic stuff. I think the first sort of clues that I got, though, that because I agree with you that he took Frost. I think the way I would put it is he took Frost out of maybe a genre-bound thing, because Frost was very conversant with different genres, soap operas, police procedurals, and I think arguably, even if I don't know if The Believers is at all supernatural. I haven't seen it. Is that supernatural?
It is supernatural.
Okay, I thought. Okay, so I think he was used to dealing with it in that way, which is very different from Lynch. He did Dune, but that was very much the exception to the rule. He's not a genre guy, which is a whole other interesting aspect of the Twin Peaks discussion we'll get into later. But yeah, so I agree with you. I think he took Frost's skill set and he put it in a place that was like less defined. You know what I mean? Where stuff was happening that you couldn't it wasn't just a mishmash of genres. It was something more too. Like there was something more going on there, like a deeper reality being accessed, or some kind of mind trip, or whatever you want to call it, mind fuck if we're not being G-rated. But like there was something more going on, and by the same token, yeah, Frost brings to him a kind of, I don't want to be too cliched about it, but like a kind of a structure and like a plot mechanism that you don't usually see in a Lynch film. Which isn't to say I think he's a better writer than people give him credit for. Like
Right.
I think Blue Velvet's pretty well written and everything, but he doesn't go for that intricate, that intricate plotting that you get in like season 1 of Twin Peaks, which to my opinion, at least the latter half of it, is like as much Mark Frost as Fire Walk with Me is David Lynch.
Of course it is.
I don't think Lynch had anything really to do with like episodes 4 through 7.
In fact, this one book I read when Twin Peaks came out and was going into its second season, they said that once season 1 hit episode 5, it now I don't necessarily agree with this, but this is what it said. It pretty much drops most of Lynch's surrealism and just heads entirely in a plot oriented way.
Sort of. I sort of agree, but I think it uses the surrealism too, because
Yes.
I think the Log Lady thing is pretty surreal, but yeah, she's used for plot purposes in that part. I don't know. Yeah, it's really interesting how the two of them interact, and I think sorry, I'm a little asthmatic, so I have to breathe between everything for some reason. But basically, I think the way that they interact as creative collaborators is really, really interesting, and I think that's something I'm looking forward to almost as much as anything else with 2016, because this is really we've never seen anything like this before, because up till now we've seen the first 3 episodes of season 1 were co-written by Lynch and Frost. 2 of them were directed by Frost, and that's pretty much it. The season 2 premiere.
Frost
story.
only directed 1 episode.
No, I know, but I'm saying they co-wrote the first 3.
Oh no,
and I don't think Lynch had anything to do with the one that Frost directed. So it's like the only time you really get to see them in that kind of close collaboration,
right,
where they're sitting head to head, they're totally on the same page in the writing, and then Lynch steps up and directs it, is really the pilot episode in episode 2. And now we're going to get 9 episodes of that, with the whole arc conceived of ahead of time. It's really going to be fascinating. I think, in a way, maybe it'll open up some new questions, but it'll also answer some questions about, the like what was really Lynch, where did they coincide on the original series? Because I think there's a lot of confusion about that now and a lot of assumptions. Well, but I think
it's going to be
seeing how they do this will answer some of that.
Well, it's going to be interesting what role this book is going to play that Mark Frost is writing.
Oh, great point. Yeah. What do you think?
I don't know. What I'm hoping is that he does not solve the Cooper Black Lodge thing in book form. That's something that almost needs to be played out in images.
Yeah, agreed. I think you and James both said that on the last one. I agree with that. I think that's the one thing. I think everything else, and I know people disagree. They're like, no, I want to see Audrey and Catherine and Pete and blah, blah, blah. Well, they're not going to see Pete, but, I want to see all this stuff unfold. I honestly, my greatest hope for the book is that it serves as like a catch-all for the exposition so that we can move into the 9 episodes not having any obligations. Like, if we get to see people or we get to visit something, great, but we're doing it because it's cool or it's evocative, not because we have to. You know what I mean? I think the book could be great for that. I think it'll be a great read in and of itself. But
remember, most people who watch the show, not counting the Peaks freaks out there, but the other people who watch the show will not have read this book. So this book can only be supplemental. It can never be, the prologue to the show.
Mm-hmm. But by the same token, I think if we're talking about people who are sort of approaching, the 9-episode run fresh, like, okay, this is new Twin Peaks, I think most of those people are going to at least check out the series beforehand. But it's theoretically you're supposed to be able to tune in and watch.
Well, you heard that Showtime is re-airing the whole
new.
thing.
I did hear that, yeah, and I'm hoping they air Firewalk with Me too, especially because Frost is now on record saying, well, that's part of the story as well.
Well,
I think it'll be.
If Frost confirms,
I think it'll be confusing, yeah.
but if Frost confirms, which he did, that it's canon, which no one thought it wasn't canon, but okay.
Right, yeah,
okay.
But it's nice to hear him say that
all
at least, because it's like, that he did not want that made, and he didn't want any part of it, and all that stuff.
Exactly. However, that means they have to address
reference stuff, yeah.
They have to address Chris Isaac's character.
Yeah. Which will be very interesting, especially for John Thorne.
Well, what's interesting about it is
Dream Theory, yeah.
Well, both Chris Isaac and David Bowie have contracts with Showtime.
I know, I heard that. That is interesting.
So, not saying they'll be a part of it. I'm just saying Showtime could say, hey, can you put in an appearance?
Yeah.
But, maybe they'll be talked about in book form. I don't know. But I think...
I don't think he's going to do too much Lodge stuff in there, is my guess. Even though I think he loves that stuff, I think he recognizes it needs to be handled visually by Lynch, and not just like written about on a page of, and then we went into the Lodge and the curtains, you know what I mean? It's just not the same thing.
No. But if they just completely ignore Chet Desmond at all, I mean, even just I think it will stand out more as being like, well, I guess they think they thought that was a mistake or something,
Yeah, and they never really do that. Even with the bad, I think you did a good job of pointing this out. Like Dead Dog Farm is referenced, maybe not in the finished Firewalk with Me, but in the missing pieces, more or less. It's sort of a sideways reference.
Well,
it's in there with
it's
the baby
because
powder.
of the baby laxative stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think even when Lynch hated stuff, he's always been of the mind, well, I can't ignore that now. It's a part of it. I have to figure out how to accommodate it. Even with the Log Lady intros he recorded for all those episodes, it's like their whole shtick is, okay, we're stuck with this. We made this decision, blah, blah, blah. How do we make it work for us now? So, yeah, I agree with you. I think even if Frost doesn't like something or Lynch doesn't like something, they're going to work with it. They're going to figure out a way to bring it back to what they want it to be. So,
all right, so let's talk about this other controversy. It seems to be going everywhere within the Twin Peaks community, and that is the Lara Flynn Boyle versus Maura Kelly situation.
Yeah, poor Lara Flynn Boyle.
According to the National Enquirer, for anyone who doesn't know, Lara Flynn Boyle is kind of peeved that she hasn't been asked yet to be in the Twin Peaks revival. Now, keep in mind, we don't even know if Donna Hayward will even be in the show.
Yeah.
Okay, but a lot of people are saying because Lara Flynn Boyle has had a lot of plastic surgery, and mostly because she was such a pain in the ass.
Yeah. And apparently still is. She's
in the second season when she was demanding plot changes because she was dating Cal MacLachlan at the time.
Right.
So I think that's a big issue. Anyway, so a lot of people are saying, you know what, Maura Kelly did fine in Firewalk with Me. Let's just have her back. At least she more or less looks the same, only a little bit older.
Yeah.
Now again, we don't even know if Donna Hayward is in the show, but honestly, I would not mind Lara Flynn Boyle being back if she hadn't been such a pain in the ass. And the thing that got me was that she came out right after the second season and said, that whole second season was unwatchable. I couldn't even sit through it.
She said that? Interesting.
Yeah. So to me, it's kind of like...
I know Sherilyn Fenn said that like 20 years later, but I didn't know anyone was saying it at the time.
Yeah, and I'm really... Listen, I know I'm a Twin Peaks apologist, but at the same time, I think it's kind of ridiculous that cast members come out and trash the show when...
And it's self-serving. It's like, well, now it's not popular anymore. I'm going to pretend that, hey, guys, that was pretty bad, huh? Now cast me in Wayne's World. I don't know. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
And now that everyone's excited it's back, it's kind of like, woo, can we come back? And it's like, you've been shitting on this show for 25 years.
Yeah, good point.
And, I get in trouble all the time with Peaks Freaks when I say that, in this revival... It is possible for a Cooper Audrey relationship possible.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, it never would have worked in the show. Now,
I think a romance wouldn't have, but they should have kept up the
Yes.
flirtatious friendship thing.
I agree.
That would have been great. And then he could have still rescued her from the Red Room. That would have been perfect, you know?
Yeah. But
Not to be.
okay, listen. I would be all for that. But I do have a real soft spot for Annie Blackburn and the whole Wyndham Earle story. So,
I don't mind Annie. I always kind of...
I liked her too. And I love the fact, I know people, it's supposed to be Cooper and Audrey. I get it. I'm just saying that I did like the fact that they went their own ways, because that's what happens. And I mean, the girl threw herself naked at him and he said, "Let's be friends."
Yeah.
There's nowhere else to go from here. I mean, yes, he rescued her from One-Eyed Jacks, but, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think for me, and also I do have to be honest here, it's great. You know, people use that. They say, "Oh, that ruined the second season. That was their storyline," and I guess that's true. But let's be honest here. Like, Engels and Peyton were not the best plotters. They did great dialogue. They did great characters. But considering how the mid-second season played out, like, why do we really think that Audrey Cooper romance would have somehow worked or been redeemed? That, you know what I mean? Like, nothing else was well executed then. So why would that have been? I don't know. Just because it was a good concept, it's kind of a stretch.
I mean, people get uncomfortable when they see Cooper and Annie like fall on the bed and start having sex. I can't even imagine Cooper and Audrey, you know, get it on.
I agree with you that something wouldn't have felt right if it had been consummated. But I think if the tension, here's the thing. Ultimately, they had a good chemistry just as people. Like, yes, it was a great romantic and sexual chemistry, but even just as characters, there was something that really clicked there. So I think, to me, that's the pity. Not necessarily that Annie came in. Certainly not that, you know, they didn't get to play out a big, you know, soap opera primetime romance, but just the fact that relationship pretty much came to an end. There's like, she makes an appearance, I think, you know, with Denise Bryson in that one scene, and then that's pretty much it. Like, you don't see them together.
But here's
that I think is kind of a shame.
I can understand, I can agree, but I also think that if you are in an intense police investigation, that brings people together more than it would, right? And one of the reasons why Audrey played a part, besides her being a flirtatious person with Agent Cooper, was the fact that her dad was a prime suspect. And
interesting side topic there. We'll get to.
And she played a huge role in the bridge between Cooper and her dad. Her dad had ties or owned One-Eyed Jacks. So, you know, she was intertwined with the investigation. She wanted to help solve who killed Laura Palmer to make Agent Cooper like her more. Well, now that the mystery has been solved and her dad went a little crazy and decided to try to win the Civil War, Audrey wasn't needed. She had to help her dad. Do you know what I mean?
I don't think it. Yeah, I think there are plot justifications for it.
That's what I'm saying.
I just think it comes down to like a sort of a character thing. I think it's like the thing that makes me regret it is not so much like plot possibilities. It's just character moments. You know.
Right.
They always had such nice character moments together.
But I'm saying plot-wise, though. It was justified. It wasn't like all of a sudden they just said goodbye and, you know, that was it. You know, it was just the story went off in other directions.
Yeah.
So
unfortunately, in some cases.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, to me, it's like that's why.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I'm okay with it because that's life. It happens.
Yeah.
You know, please. Yeah. There's a lot of girls and boys that people have flirted with when they were younger too. They all didn't get married. Yeah. You know.
Although devil's advocate, I could say, you know, it was only still a matter of days. So, you know, they were only 2 weeks in or something.
Well, you know what? There's a lot of relationships.
Maybe I'm just shipping them.
There's a lot of relationships in high school that 2 weeks feels like a year. So,
well, here's something I wanted to say when you brought up the Ben thing, because I just noticed this. I've been reading the old, the alt TV Twin Peaks message boards from like the early '90s.
right.
I found like a pretty good archived stash of that, and over the past few months, I've kind of been looking at things people said, like, well, the show was actually on, and somebody raised a point which I've sort of had in the back of my mind. I've definitely thought of, but they raised it pretty well, which is, why the hell does Ben Horne not get charged with anything after, okay, he's not guilty of killing Leland. He's still a pimp. He's still, like, pretty heavily indicted in the whole arson thing with the mill. It's like, I think one of the biggest problems with the shift in the second season is not just that the Laura Palmer and the Palmer's family gets dropped. It's that, like, everything gets dropped. Like, they built up all this momentum with, Ben Horne, the criminal mastermind. And yeah, I get the dramatic arc they're trying to play out where, he's just humiliated and crushed and he goes crazy, but that's kind of a weird development that Audrey comes in and she says to Cooper explicitly, my dad runs One-Eyed Jacks. And then they never follow up on that. I don't know. I thought that was kind of odd. Well, I don't know
but
what
that's
your
in
thoughts on
Canada.
that are, but right, somebody did point that out, but still, they said, there's solicitation of minors in the U.S. There's all sort of stuff going on, and even beyond that, they know there's drug running out of One-Eyed Jacks with the Renault brothers sting and all of that stuff. It's like,
but none of
I understand they wouldn't necessarily jump right up and be like, you're charged with this and that, but you'd think they'd kind of keep an eye on him and try and figure some of that out. I don't know.
I guess none of it ties back to him because while we know it, nobody dared open their mouth about him.
Except for Audrey though in that scene.
She says but Emery Battis would be one charged.
Yeah,
and he would have to say this is under explicit orders of Benjamin Horne, which he wouldn't do.
Because he's dead anyways at that point.
Exactly. There's a lot of people dead. Blackie's dead.
Yeah.
Catherine.
Maybe that was their idea with that, is try and kill everybody off, so they would. But it's so weird. Like, they don't even address it. It's like they're not even like, well, Ben did this and that, but we're not gonna concern ourselves with it. It's just like it's forgotten. The second they know he didn't kill Laura Palmer, it's like, well, all right, I guess we're done with Ben Horne.
Well, you know what? It's like, did you see the Avengers?
No, actually, I'm like one of the few people who hasn't seen it.
Well, they fight aliens in this movie, okay?
Yes.
And then in Iron Man 3, Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, is going through post-traumatic stress because he realizes there's aliens out there, and he didn't realize that the universe was that big. He thought, there was Earth. So it freaked him out that there was this whole larger other world out there. Well, I think that's what happened in Twin Peaks. I think that once they realize there's a possibility that there's
that is a good point.
That there's a Bob and a Black Lodge out there, who gives a shit about Benjamin Horne?
True. Although then, with that, it's like, if they had played that up more in the following episode, it would have worked too, Like, if episode 17 had been all, like, still fallout from that, instead of, like, trying to, like, now Nadine's going back to high school, and, like, just all these distractions, I think that could have worked. Where it's like, okay, yeah, but just put Ben back in the Great Northern, because we've got bigger fish to fry right now. What is going on in those woods,
I mean, in retrospect, the writers, in retrospect, the directors, heck, in retrospect, me, you, anybody else who follows Twin Peaks could have made season 2 tighter. My big thing that I've always said is Wyndham Earle should have been the one who shot Cooper. That would have bridged season 2 faster. Now, I'm not opposed to Josie Packard doing it. It makes some kind of logical sense if you follow
Except for, like you said, her reason.
her reason is, I need to get off this show. So
yeah, exactly.
So it was like, why did you shoot me, Josie? Because you came here. Okay, I understand you're dealing with some, crazy shit, and you fucked over a lot of people, Josie, but so is everybody on this show.
Yeah.
Anybody could have shot Cooper, So, all right.
Well, there's another interesting thing, I guess, segue into something else. the Frost and Lynch thing with Cooper, because they have very different visions of the character. I think it's funny because everyone thinks, okay, Lynch is the dark guy. It must have been his idea to like have. But from what I've read, it was like Frost was the one who came up with the final image of the finale.
Right.
And Lynch was kind of stuck with it and supposedly didn't like it that much. And that's partly why he added the split in the Lodge, so that, hey, there's still a good Cooper in the Lodge. So that's going to be really interesting in the new 9 episodes, is how they reconcile that. Because I think for Frost, Cooper is a more complex character. I think he's interested in him being kind of a flawed hero. And I think Lynch, the sense I get is Lynch actually kind of sees him in a sort of a simpler way, as being this great spirit, you know, who sort of gets things and is in tune with things all the time, sort of a yin to the, the Twin Peaks yang, where they're, more conflicted and suppressing things. Like Cooper's the one who's sort of, what's his name in Dune? Moadib? He's sort of like that,
Right. Well, let me ask you this.
Sure.
So people for a last year or two have been saying, give it up, give it up, give it up. There's no such thing as a return to Twin Peaks. It won't happen.
I didn't think there was. Yeah, I was saying that pretty much.
I was always joking with James and others saying that, no, what's going to happen is like everything else, like Dallas, there'll be a Twin Peaks reboot on the on the CW network, and we'll get like 1 or 2 cast members, and the rest will be all these young kids bathing by Snoqualmie Falls.
Yeah.
But then it got announced, very surprisingly, that it was going to be made. Then it became announced that Lynch and Frost were writing the whole thing, that Lynch was directing the whole thing, which was just completely amazing and shocking.
That's more than he directed of the original Twin Peaks. He directed, I think, 6 episodes.
There you go.
And now it's going to be 9.
And then the fact that they're writing it together and directing it, it'll be there. If nothing else, it will be cohesive. We hope.
Yeah, and it's
But here's the thing: it's like I have no question in my mind that this thing is going to have, no matter what, some amazing stuff in it.
Absolutely.
However. I think Twin Peaks fans need to realize this, that no matter what, it is not going to be what any of us think is going to happen.
Exactly. Every time I predict or say something, I say, well, now that basically is not going to happen because I just vocalized it. It can't happen because I wouldn't have thought of it. You know what I mean? Like whatever it is that's going to happen,
and now
I assume is going to be something none of us saw coming.
Nah.
Same with Fire Walk With Me, same with the finale episode, even episode 14 to a certain extent. Like they always, or the season 2 premiere, you can go all the way back. It's like every twist and turn in that road was kind of impossible to see beforehand. Right.
So I'm curious because we live in a world now where people either love something or hate it. Mm-hmm. And we know that this first episode, when it airs, is going to be one of the most loved and one of the most hated things in history.
Yeah.
Right.
Part of me suspects that it's the first one's going to go over really well. Part of me suspects this. And then a few episodes in, or maybe even just the last one, it's going to, go into whatever you want to call it, finale territory, Fire Walk With Me territory. Still with Frost, but, something that people didn't see coming or don't want or feel, what, he can't do this to us. And then it's going to get to that point where it's just like, makes the Sopranos finale look like a crowd pleaser or something. I think I don't know if it's going to be the first episode or what, but at some point in that series, there's going to be some major audience alienation going on.
Oh, it's going to happen. I think
that's going to be
episode 1.
Really interesting. Yeah,
I really do think episode 1.
Yeah.
If you go on the IMDb boards after episode 1 hits, it's going to be a nightmare. Now, one of the things that I know you haven't listened to my interview with Catherine Coulson yet, but
not yet.
One of the things we talked about is that Twin Peaks now being filmed is in a different world than in 1989 and 1991. So there was no Instagram, Twitter, all this stuff. So we talked about how are you going to keep set photos secret? You know what I mean? How are you going to keep?
Oh, okay, I see. I thought you meant in world, but yeah, you're saying just the shoot itself.
The shoot itself. I mean, I don't want to know things about the episode while it's being shot.
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm almost thinking, am I going to have to get off social media during this entire production?
Yeah.
As well as when the show is on, because that's, I mean, it's easier than said than done. But you know, and here's the other thing. It's like I said, I think this is going to be, if nothing else, really interesting and astounding that we're even getting this thing. But here's my question to you.
Yes.
And I'm not trying to throw this out into the air to cause this to happen, but you and me are David Lynch fans, huge David Lynch fans, huge Twin Peaks fans, right?
Yeah.
If this show, which it won't, but let's just play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
If this new series sucks, and I mean sucks, does this kill the original show?
No, of course not. Not even close. Because first of all, you know, and we can agree or disagree about, you know, the flaws of season 2, but I think we can both agree there's definitely a dip in quality after the Laura Palmer mystery is resolved, and that by no means invalidates those earlier episodes or the later stuff like the finale. You know, I mean, first of all, for me, I think I'm always going to judge something, no pun intended, but I'm always going to judge it by the peaks. You know, the best points in that thing. And that's true even of like a movie where you're just 2 hours. Even if there's a lot of crappy stuff, if there's like amazing stuff in that, I might not call it, you know, a masterpiece, but I'll say, hey, this movie's worth seeing. It's got like some of the best sequences I've ever seen, even if it doesn't add up as much. So I think, I think, no, it wouldn't have any impact on the original. Plus, in a way, it's a somewhat different entity. It's still part of the same thing, but you know, especially I would say, even Firewalk with Me being different from Twin Peaks, it's still that same period. It's still coming out of that same process. You know, I think this is going to be part of Twin Peaks, but under that umbrella, it's going to be something of a distinct entity.
Now, because
that's my take on it, but
because this is 25 years later, and we presumably are thinking that this is going to take place 25 years later. Mm-hmm. Do you think that in this series, Lynch is going to be playing with time in the same way he did with Firewalk with Me, or do you think he's evolved past that and we're now going to do something else?
Playing with time, you mean in the sense that it might be a prequel?
Well, like I'm just saying, in Firewalk with Me,
mixing the forward and backward.
Yeah. Are we going to be dealing with that again? You think, or do you think it's going to be a linear thing?
I don't think it's going to be like every 2 seconds, you know, somebody from the past or the future is popping up. But I'd be surprised if that element doesn't play into it, at least through dreams and actual visits to the lodge, which I think they'll withhold that. You know, I don't think we're going to be dropping into the lodge in like the first episode. Well, maybe we'll have some flashes and visions like the convenience store sequence in Firewalk with Me, but I don't think characters are going to be having like a major visit there. You don't think it's going to begin like like James and I joke about, which is it's just going to begin with Cooper sitting in the chair for like 10 minutes?
No, with the clock just tick 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 with Cheryl Lee as Laura sitting on the couch, and Michael J. Anderson rubbing his hands. You know, I could. I don't think that, because it would almost feel, it would be something of a surprise, but it would still feel a little obvious. But something like that, I wouldn't be shocked. I'll put it this way. And then to cut to Truman sitting on the stump, just sitting there waiting still. Yeah, that, you know, here's the thing with Lynch. When I put in the missing pieces and I watched it, this is like, okay, first of all, it's deleted scenes. Like, he's already kind of fixed what he's going to do with this. It was created 22 years ago. And yet, even with that, he found a way to sort of thwart expectations, which is within a few minutes, we get that ridiculously endless long scene of the fight between Sheriff Cable and Chet Desmond. Right. And you know, in the editing room, just like he did with Andy getting hit in the face by the board and all these other gags on the show, he extends that as far as he can. And I just kind of had to laugh, because I'm like, okay,
Exactly. Fans have been waiting 22 years for the deleted scenes from Fire Walk with Me. They're so excited. And what does Lynch do? He throws in the most egregious, overextended scene just to kind of tweak a little bit, I think. So, I would not be surprised if with the new series, it does start off with something very I don't know if it'll be Coop in the Red Room, but very slow and kind of ponderous and sort of like The Waiter and season 2 premiere.
Oh God, no.
Talking about love-hate on the first episode.
That was the episode that made many fans jump off the ship. The season 2 premiere.
That's what I've come to learn.
Yeah, I've known so many parents, friends of mine, who said the moment The Waiter came in the third time, they changed the channel. But it's funny though. It's because when you watch those missing pieces, if you notice, it says edited by David Lynch, not Mary Sweeney.
Yeah,
so it's very clear that those scenes that we see are not the way they were going to be in the finished film. Great point. Great point.
That plus the fact that obviously you and I know this just from filmmaking, but you can't. Scenes that are deleted from a rough cut do not look like that. You know what I mean? He obviously went back in and re-edited them. And beyond that, you have some digital work on some of those, with that weird zoom and the convenience store scene, and I think something going on with her smile under the fan. That stuff that he basically executed in 2014. So.
Well, there's that, and also there's just a tremendous amount of alternate takes of dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So I personally think Lynch did that on purpose so that there could never be a fan cut. I think that's part of it. Yeah. That you would have to lose something, one of them, to gain the other.
Yeah, he wanted to be two distinct entities. And I haven't watched the fan edit yet. Maybe I'll watch it at some point, but I'm not rushing off.
I have no interest. I have no interest because we don't.
Yeah, it doesn't really work.
We don't even have all the deleted scenes yet.
That's true as
well. So you can't do it. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure you've heard me go on and on about how, there's that scene that everybody loves with in the Hayward house, talking about the angel, but Doc Hayward's talking about how he left his rose at Sparkwood in 21.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the only way that scene works even better emotionally is at the end of the film when James speeds off. If you look at that shot, the camera starts to pan down when it cuts to Laura walking. Why does the camera start to pan down when James rides off? It's because the camera panned down to Doc Hayward's rose left wilting in the road.
Now, is that in the script?
Yes.
Or are you just... okay.
No, it's in the script.
I didn't remember that. I haven't read it since way before the missing pieces.
So to me, it's
I have to read it again.
You have the Hayward scene, which is very good, but the reason why payoff is gone, and there's no reason for Doc Hayward to say he left his rose at Spark 121 if you're not going to show the rose at Spark 121. So.
Interesting. I think I did hear you mention that, actually, now that I remember it, but I'd forgotten.
So there's little things like that, that drive me crazy, and because there's things like
purposefully so, probably.
But I mean, there's some decent, really good scenes in the missing pieces. There's some decent ones, and to me, there's also some really bad ones. But whatever. But I really love my favorite scene I keep talking about. I mean, besides the convenience store scene, which to me, my wife turned to me and said, that's the version that should have been in the movie, which I agree. Not the David Bowie stuff.
But that one's really I'm so compelled to keep going back and back, especially that part. There's a part where it gets into this really weird, cutting, this really weird sort of semi-jerky, semi-fluid cutting between... there's a whoosh on the soundtrack because the sound design is just incredible in that scene, and you see the jumping man kind of vibrating, and he's his energy's getting sucked up, and then they just cut to the weird woodman with the beard, and they're cutting on random motions, and it's just so kinetic, and then you cut to Bob, and he's grimacing, and what does he say?
Oh, the fury, fury of my momentum, or whatever.
I have the fury of my own momentum. Yeah.
But what's weird?
Totally with you on that.
But those woodsmen and stuff, when they cut to them, I go, "Get them out of here!" Because
they are pretty silly. Yeah.
They're silly looking, and because I haven't.
It's Jürgen Prochnow in like the most he gets top billing for that. He's like in the opening credits, and he's literally on screen for about 5 seconds, which I find hilarious.
And about 2 seconds in the finished cut. But what's interesting is that, like, because I didn't grow up watching that particular version of that scene, when they cut to these other new people, I'm like, who the hell are these people? Get them out of here. But my, there's two things about the missing pieces, which I'm sure people listening to this have heard before, so I'm sorry, but I haven't talked to Joel in a while, so I just want to say this to him. My favorite of the scenes is the Ed and Norma in the car.
Right. Yeah, we did. You mentioned that.
And also, I don't know if you've heard this or not, but since it was 1992, people weren't doing this as much. Maybe once every like 80 movies, but now it's like commonplace. But after the end credits of Fire Walk With Me, you know, you have Laura, the music, the ethereal music, movie's over. Yeah. Then it should have faded up and said several days later, and we should have gotten the whole Annie in the hospital with Cooper in the Black Lodge at the end with him going, "Oh, I didn't brush my teeth," and all that stuff. If that had been a 5-minute tag after the movie, that movie would have made probably another $5-10 million.
But they probably still wouldn't have made a sequel.
No.
So it would have just been a dead end.
But it would have been awesome.
If there had been a sequel, I don't know. That's a sequence where I find it very cool to watch, but I'm glad it wasn't in the film. Like, I'm glad that it's... And now even more so, the fact that they're coming out with 2016, that makes me even, like, happier that it's in the missing pieces.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's such an odd... Here's something about it that somebody pointed out. They don't show Bob in the mirror. They just show him, like, looking at it, which I think is interesting. Like, they avoid... I can't remember if they avoid an angle or they actually just don't show Bob, but, like, you only see Cooper looking at the mirror.
But he's not looking at himself. He's got his...
He's looking off to the side.
He's looking off to the side. So, that's all right with me.
Yeah. Well, it could just be that. I think the interesting part about it is going back to the whole thing we were talking about Lynch not liking that ending of the finale, even though he was kind of stuck with it, and he delivers it brilliantly. Like, that's one of the great moments on the show, you know,
right,
where he smashes his head in the mirror and he looks, and like Bob, that's just like such a great moment. But considering that he felt kind of stuck with it, apparently, you know, from what I've heard, and then in the movie he doesn't show it, that's interesting to me. And again, it makes me, I guess, to go back to that point we didn't really get to finish with, but the idea that Frost and Lynch kind of see him somewhat differently. I don't know. Excuse me. Do you feel that way at all? Like when you watch the show and you watch parts that are more, you know, Lynch directed or whatever, or parts where it's more Frost at the helm, that there's sort of Cooper's a little bit different between the two of them?
The way I see it is in Lynch's hands, he, at least in the beginning, because that was when he directed the most episodes, he wants Cooper to be kind of enigmatic and mysterious in his past, and we just know Cooper from today. Mark Frost, I believe, if I can go by what I know, would like to make him a fully three-dimensional character with a past.
Yes, totally agree. That's a good way of putting it.
With a present and a future. Past.
Exactly.
And I don't think Lynch was too keen on actually explain, because there's that moment in season 1 right before he takes the shot at the shooting range where he talks about how he's been hurt in the past. Yeah. I think if it was up to Lynch, that would be all we knew.
I don't think even my guess is Lynch wouldn't even put that in, because that was
probably not.
That was an Engels written episode.
Oh, I'm sure.
And then the next one, here's an interesting thing. The next one, episode 5, where they go to Log Lady's cabin, that's the first time Mark Frost writes solo for the show. And that, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think that's one of the few times, actually no, I am wrong about this, because in the Lynch Frost episode, the same thing happens. But, you know, you could speculate that maybe Frost wrote the scene where he isn't quite comfortable with the Log Lady. It's kind of the first time you see that, you know, for all his mysticism and his being in tune, there's still something in him that's holding back a little bit and isn't quite sure about, this direction that he's going in. So that kind of makes me wonder too. And I think even episode 14, which is, Lynch at his finest and, one of the best things, but it's written just by Mark Frost. And on one of the message boards, somebody was posting part of the script. And in the script, he's much more tentative about going to the roadhouse with the log lady than he is in the finished episode. Like, he actually says, well, I don't know, Harry, do we have time? And Harry says this thing, oh, yeah, the Japanese lawyer is flying in the morning. Like, there's this whole, rigmarole that, I'm kind of glad they cut because it wouldn't really have worked on screen. It's much spookier the way it happens.
Oh, of course. And that's one thing Lynch is really good at, using...
Right, cutting down the fat,
Yeah, and using few words to convey so much more in the silences. But it's interesting...
I was just going to say, even so, in that episode, I get the feeling that the Cooper you're seeing, the one who arrests Ben Horn and goes to the roadhouse and ends with that pained look on his face and reaching for his ring and knowing something happened and somehow he failed. I feel like even in Lynch's hands, the fact that was Frost writing that episode and determining the direction it was going to go in, I feel like that's more Frost's Cooper in a way, a Cooper who's more fallible. And I would love to find out how they decided they were going to reveal the killer. Because
I don't
decided, okay, he's gonna murder somebody else. It's not just gonna be they get their man. Like, whose call was that? I don't know.
I'm sure it was Lynch's because he loves to watch Cheryl Lee die.
Well, yeah, he's had three times now.
He's killed her 3 times.
I'm just hoping if she comes back as a redhead, they finally give her a break.
Yeah.
Let her live once.
But I don't believe for one second. And I know they shot these scenes where Shirley was killed by Ray Wise, Richard Beamer, and
and Silva. Which
as Bob. But at the same time, though, it's like, it doesn't make any sense to me because what the hell would Ben Horn be doing at the Palmer house?
Well, that's confusing as hell. Secondly, I think we talked about this last time. Okay, great, they do that. They keep it concealed. The very next 2 episodes, with tons of crew members around, they're shooting all kinds of spoilery scenes. And then they're shooting his wake 3 episodes later, way before the killer's reveal has been aired. So I've never really... I mean, I get the secrecy, but it seems almost fruitless. If somebody's going to spoil it, they're going to have plenty of opportunities coming up.
But again,
what I mean?
We weren't living in the Twitter age back then.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a stopgap or whatever, but even so, for all the fuss they make about it, about keeping it a secret, they were shooting, I think from what I've established, they shot that episode right almost the same week that the season 2 premiere was going up. So that still leaves 7 weeks for that secret to get out between, the other episodes they're shooting. I'd love to know more of the logistics that went into actually keeping it a secret.
But let's talk about something that you had emailed me about.
Sure.
I guess I mentioned that Fire Walk With Me was kind of a contradiction of Lynch's statement.
Great point.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit, just so that people know what we're talking about?
Yeah, that's something that you mentioned, and I sort of disagreed with, and the more I think about it, the more I
what did you disagree?
Really
what did I say originally?
So here's what you said.
Remind me.
You said supposedly Lynch did not want to reveal the killer. He said that for years, and he didn't just say that at the time. He said it since. He said it in Slice of Lynch. He said it every time he's given the opportunity. We should not have revealed the killer. The mystery should have gone on
forever.
Sometimes he says it maybe we would have waited till the last episode. Sometimes he said it should have never happened. We should have never known. Now, you pointed out that makes no sense because he made a movie entirely devoted to the concept that we have to know who did it, and we have to know why, and we have to see it in detail. So at the time, I was like, well, that I get what you're saying, but I think the fundamental thing is he liked that character, Laura Palmer. Now, the way to keep her alive on the show was through the mystery, keeping going. And then once that's resolved, the only way to do it is to go back. And I do think that's true. Mm-hmm. But that still doesn't really get to the root of what you're saying, which is the sensibility that thinks we should never know that, and the sensibility that says this is the most important thing you can know, are completely different. And that's what I can't really reconcile, is like, he seems to have two completely opposite impulses about it.
You know what I think?
He never really acknowledges that. He never acknowledges that in interviews or anything. So
here's what this just dawned on me.
Sure.
Every filmmaker, they for the most part, they love their movies like kids, right?
Right.
And I know Lynch has gone on record, and we know this. He loves all his films except Dune. He was on Charlie Rose promoting Lost Highway, and he talked about Fire Walk with Me, saying that it's
I got to see that interview. I've only seen the one on Straight Story.
Yeah,
I don't remember them talking about Fire Walk with Me at all.
I think it's on YouTube. He's talking about Lost Highway.
I'll pick it up.
But he says Fire Walk with Me is a film I love, but it's a film that no one else seemed to, especially critics. Mm-hmm. And he says I hope that people one day will look back and reevaluate the film, which obviously people have.
Right.
However, if Lynch is saying this kind of stuff, right? And he's said in 2000 or 2001, around the time of Straight Story, Mulholland Drive, that Twin Peaks is dead. That basically as dead as a doornail. I'm almost wondering, and I know he loves Fire Walk with Me, not doubting that, but I almost wonder if there has been moments in his life where he's thought it was a mistake to make that film, because that film effectively killed the franchise. And I hate saying that word, franchise.
Right, but they kind of wanted it to be that.
But I'm almost wondering if that's what he means by the mystery should have kept going, besides solving on the show, because that movie completely answers everything, mostly, and coupled that with Jen Lynch's diary. You pretty much know the ins and outs of Laura Palmer,
So you think him saying it shouldn't have been revealed on the show is partly a cryptic way of him saying it shouldn't have been revealed, or a cryptic way of saying the movie shouldn't have been made as well, or what do you like?
I don't know. I don't know what he knows. I don't know what he thinks. I'm just saying that, like,
that's your.
I'm almost wondering if he literally thinks the mystery should never have been solved, and this is 25 years later. Mm-hmm. I'm almost wondering if he thinks, because let's be honest here, Fire Walk with Me is the movie that, besides Dune, got him the worst reviews of his career.
Right.
So I'm almost wondering, and it was 4 years before he came out with Lost Highway, and I don't think it was just the fact that he didn't have an idea, like he says in Charlie Rose. I think he couldn't get funding.
Right.
And it's interesting that we've now.
Well, he sued the company. He sued the production company because they weren't. He was supposed to get like a 3-picture deal, and they weren't. They weren't like following through somehow. I don't know the details of it, but.
And now it's been longer. Right. It's been longer since Inland Empire, when he said at the time of Inland Empire how happy he was with all this new technology that he could just make films all the time now, and he hasn't made one since.
I know.
And now he's directing the entire new series of Twin Peaks. So,
right.
I think that in a way, Lynch is. Well,
here's a question.
I think he's going to go all out with this series. I really do, because I think. And I have no basis on this, but I'm just saying I think there's a possibility that he may know that this could be the last thing he makes.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that he is going to not go out with a whimper.
No, he definitely won't.
But I don't think he's going to go the way of Angels and all that stuff with Laura Palmer again. I think we're going to, I don't know where we're going, but... like everyone seems to quote now, it'll be a place both wonderful and strange,
Right.
It's so funny how, like, that was like a throwaway quote on the show that I remember watching when it aired, thinking, that sentence kind of sums up the whole show. It it almost seemed purposely put in, and now people quote it like it's some, like, new thought that they've had. Believe me, people have been thinking about that since Cooper went into Al Cave and first said that. All right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know. I just think that Lynch is realizing that mistakes have been made in the Twin Peaks universe, and I think that him and Frost together, my idea is that they're going to try and course correct everything.
Do you think they'll contradict stuff, though?
Why not?
Whenever they do course corrects...
Why not? Fire Walk with Me completely contradicts the show.
Well, sort of, but that's the thing. Like I was saying before with the mythology of it is Lynch yanks it as far into his own territory as he can, but he still, to a certain extent, I think the only thing that feels like an outright contradiction is the Leland thing, where he says, I thought you always knew it was me in the movie, and in the show he's pretty explicitly like, I never remembered anything. That's the only part to me that feels like a pretty strong contradiction. The rest of it is more of like, okay, you saw that from a distance, but now we're going to show you up close, and it looks really different. But it's still the same, other than minor, we can talk about minor things like locations or whatever. But for the most part, like he's trying to course correct while sticking to the rules that were set beforehand. I really do think that they'll do that on the new show as well.
Let me tell you something, my friend.
Let me hear it.
All right. Laura's mom says, and see, my feeling is this, all right? I think with a few exceptions, right? I don't know why they thought of Dead Dog Farm, but okay, that's great. But with a few exceptions, I personally think the finale, they pulled some stuff out of there. But for the most part, when dealing with Fire Walk with Me, I think they watched the pilot and decided to make the movie bleed into the pilot. Okay?
Yeah, I agree with that.
So you have Donna saying to James, she told me Bobby killed some guy. Okay, so now we have to explain Bobby killing some guy.
Right, yeah.
Now, Laura's mom says, I heard her phone ring once. So we get Laura's phone ringing once in the movie. However, in the show, they traced that call to Ben Horn's office, which was Leland.
Right.
Now it's James calling her to book a date.
Right, yeah, I remember, I think you mentioned that.
So I'm just saying there's little things like that through the whole thing.
There's little things, but put it this way. I don't think we'll get anything, I doubt we'll get anything that is completely, that's theoretically little things like that you can say, oh, she didn't hear the other call, she was too, drunk or drugged up or whatever, or this or that. You can come up with little tweaks to or we didn't see this part. We didn't see Jacques give her the poker chip and stuff like that.
Right.
Like there's justifications that are possible. I don't think they'll do anything that is like what you saw didn't happen. Like I don't think we'll see anything in the new series that says, this completely negates something from Twin Peaks. Because even the Leland thing, you can say, okay, he was either lying in the cell or he was just so in denial that he was telling Cooper that or whatever, You can come up with sort of rationalizations for it. I feel like their whole, especially with Lynch, and you can look at it even with Mulholland Drive, he adds things to the TV pilot, but he keeps the general shape, and he figures out a conclusion that can go with that. So he doesn't reinvent what he has. He takes it and he recontextualizes it so that it's still what it was before, but now there's something new added to it. And that's kind of what he does with Fire Walk with Me, and even the finale to a certain extent. And I feel pretty confident that that's what he'll do in 2016 too. So we'll see things in the series and the film a totally new way now, but I don't think we'll see anything that says, guess what? What you saw didn't happen. It's not canon. It doesn't exist. You know what I mean?
All right, so let's talk about this. There's a theory going around ever since I talked with James about this on a podcast, and then I talked with Catherine Coulson about this as well.
Right.
The idea that because Mark Frost has gone on record saying that this new series will, in some ways, we don't know how yet, tie into the original series' central mystery, which obviously is Laura Palmer. That says to me, if you go by the finale episode, the log lady bringing the oil, saying that this is an opening to a gateway. The fact that Hawk says, that's where I found the pages of the diary and the bloody towel.
Right.
And then they bring in Ronette out of nowhere to make her go, that's the day Laura Palmer died. It seems pretty obvious. Now, again, when I say obvious, that's just me theoretically speculating, because who the hell knows what's going to happen. But but it seems likely, if you're going to follow that logic, if you're going to go into the central mystery again, you have to deal with Ronette and the Log Lady's connection to Laura Palmer.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Or at least connection to the Black Lodge.
A million and a half things, but between two worlds among them, definitely makes me feel like, in some way, maybe it will just be one episode at the end, but it's going to be like a crucial thing, that Laura Palmer is going to be in there and playing a role somehow as a spirit or whatever. And I kind of thought that when they announced it, I'm like, well, that's always been Lynch's draw. His biggest draw to Twin Peaks, was the whole Laura Palmer mystery. So I'd have to imagine. But the more I thought about it and the more I read about it, was like, oh, no, this is definitely, like, whatever it is that's bringing him back to Twin Peaks has something to do with her. So who knows what it will be or how it will play out. But
do you think Ronette will be in it and play some sort of role?
I hope so. And I think Lynch is the one who always brought people back, Mm-hmm. Obviously in the finale, even, well, ironically not so much in Firewalk with Me, but, the rest of the time when he didn't have to cut 90 minutes of footage, he's always bringing people back,
Right.
Sylvia Horn and Ronette and all that. Here's the thing about Ronette that interests me, and this is why I brought it up to you beforehand and wanted to talk about it. I have a reading of the film, which I'm not even sure about myself, but it's something that I sort of like to play with and consider, which is that it's possible at the end of the movie that it's Laura who actually summons the angel and saves Ronette. Because if you look at it, it's a perfect mirror of the scene in the Pink Room where she saves Donna. You get the same white light flashing, you have the same facial reactions, and you have her basically defying Bob. I think in the screenplay they actually have Bob in the Pink Room, his voice, not him, but his voice saying, look what we can do together. And she goes, no, and she jumps up and she saves Donna. The same exact thing
Bob
happens.
is the white light.
Right, exactly. So the same exact thing happens, or possibly either Bob or at the very least some sort of spiritual force there, from one of the lodges. But yeah, what you have in the train car is the exact same sequence, basically. It's cut very similarly. Now, in the film, of course, you see the angel show up, and there's no direct evidence that, nothing to lead you necessarily to say, oh, well, that Laura, summoned the angel back to save Ronette. But when you look at it that way, it makes the ending very interesting, to me at least. It makes it more dramatically compelling, because what you're left with without that is basically, well, her arc ends because she won't let Bob in and she dies. And it's not all that dramatically compelling, It's just kind of where the film needed to go, because that's what was established in the series. Now, if she saves Ronette, and this, by the way, it only works for viewers of the film who know the series, because if you watch the film, Ronette looks dead at the end of the movie. She's lying. She's lying outside the train car, and Leland kicks her over, and that's it. So you have to know the series to know that, the angel actually did save Ronette. But if you know that and you watch that and you think, okay, throughout the movie, the various lodge spirits, be they angels or Mike or whoever, they kind of show up at crucial moments for the characters. Like, there's usually some personal event that triggers it, like Leland seeing Laura on the couch with Donna, and then he envisions her and Ronette instead. And then that's when the one-armed man comes up and taunts him with the ring and all that. And same things at other points. The little jumping boy with the mask shows up outside the motel when Teresa starts to suspect that maybe Leland is Laura's father. So you have all these little clues throughout that it's sort of a two-way street with the spirit world. It isn't just simply these demons coming swooping down in and possessing people and they're helpless. It's also the people sometimes summoning the demons or the spirits or the angels or whatever. So basically that's sort of a big tangent, but what interested me about that idea that Ronette and the Log Lady would sort of play some role, it sort of brings Ronette back into it. And I think she's a character who can seem kind of irrelevant if you just look at the story loosely. Like, okay, she was just there to show us sort of a version of what happened to Laura. Because Laura's corpse looks all pristine, but then you see this girl shaken coming down the train tracks. But she keeps coming back at these important moments, and she keeps being a key to Laura throughout the show, and just small little moments where they include her, including in that final episode, which also is interesting because it's the only time in the whole series we see Renette like in good health, basically. It's
and with short hair.
Yeah, she looks like she's like back, and obviously she's still traumatized. They're making her smell. They're making her smell some like trigger thing, which is kind of terrible. But she looks good. She's like healthy again. She even looks more like clean cut than before. It's like you get a sense just from that brief appearance. And I don't think this was like Lynch planting the seeds, like, oh, I'm going to show her full arc firewalk with me, because I don't think he even knew he was making the film yet at that point. But it's interesting that whatever instinct told him, it's like we have to bring Renette back, and we have to show her like looking like she's recovered. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's interesting to me. So I don't know if that makes sense or anything, but it's just a little tangent that sent me on.
It does make sense.
I would love to see her come back and sort of bring it full circle. Like, we really get a sense that's only hinted at in the film that maybe in some way Laura saved her, Yeah,
but the thing about it is that if Laura was saving her, which, it may happen. Again, Lynch's films are all about how you interpret them.
Yeah, it's exactly.
But
it's not something I can like lock myself down on. But
Laura looks pretty pissed off that an angel's there with Ronette. She's like, what the hell?
Well, that's the ambiguous thing. Is she pissed off? Is she like frightened? Is she fascinated? I don't really know. My take on it was always kind of just like amazement almost, and like kind of there's like an intensity, which I think maybe also, to be fair, there's an author, I think Christy Desmond, who actually says something. She wrote something about that in her essay, so I kind of got the idea from there as well. But even in the film itself, there's like an intense focus, which, like I said, it's very similar to what you see in the close-up in the pink room. Same thing, she's kind of angry and intense and focused, and in that sequence, it results in her saving Donna and kind of pulling herself out of the stupor. Now, the interesting thing too about the Firewalk with Me train car sequence is what happens as a result of her freeing Donna. That's what brings her the ring. Because the ring only rolls in the train car when Renette opens the door, because her hands have been unbound by the angel. That brings Laura the ring, which then ensures that she won't be possessed by Bob. So there's actually a direct linkage between whatever it is that saves Renette, if it's Laura or just an angel coming from somewhere else, and Laura herself being saved.
Well, let's talk about this, though.
Anyway.
So
that's interesting, too.
But it's interesting because I think, in a way, and this is me looking back on the whole thing 25 years later, I didn't think about this at the time,
right.
But it almost seems like fate that Laura dies, because it's
right.
Because her dying brings Cooper to town,
right?
Because the Black Lodge has been possessing Leland for 40 years. They thought that maybe he'd get them somewhere. He's working with Ben Horn, so he has ties to the hotel,
right,
and dignitaries and all these people coming through the hotel. Gives the Black Lodge lots of access for lots of Garmonbozia. But Cooper coming to town, they go, oh shit, we can ditch this body of Leland. Bob's never going to leave Leland, but we can make it so Leland has to die, so Bob's out. We can put Bob in Cooper, because apparently the Black Lodge has, if we go by Firewalk with Me, which of course is now canon, or has always been canon, between Chris Isaac, David Bowie, and now Agent Cooper, this Black Lodge has a
you said that. Yeah,
has a huge problem with FBI agents. And
or
Cooper,
like a fetish for them or something.
They do, and Cooper eventually would leave Twin Peaks, go back to Philadelphia, go back to D.C., and the Black Lodge would be closer and closer to the White House and the government. And James, of course, brings up the Omen all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of funny to think that of course no one was planning this, but it's just kind of funny how it makes logical sense that the Black Lodge would just ditch Leland and make so Bob could go into Cooper.
Well, let me ask you this, though. Do you feel Bob is working with the one-armed man and Mike, or do you feel that they are opposed to each other? Because obviously in the show they're very clearly opposed, but in the film it's a little more ambiguous.
It is ambiguous. what's weird about the show, which always got me, was that the last time we see the one-armed man is when he's laying in the bed with a washcloth on his head, and we never come back to him, not even in the finale. And so I was surprised that he came into the movie, which I mean, it's great that he is. I was just surprised. So we've only heard about it, from Mike's perspective in the show, but it seems very, like they're enemies. But at the same time, though, if they're enemies, then why didn't the one-armed man just wait outside the train car and kick Bob's ass?
Or even if he can't do that, I guess maybe because he has one arm. I'm like, why does he not know who he is in the series? That's the weirdest thing to me. Now, I heard somebody suggest, this is interesting, that he actually, it almost seems too clever, honestly, and I know Twin Peaks can be pretty clever, but it seems a little too clever that he's actually lying about not knowing who Bob is. The cops, the FBI, they're on to him, and they sort of catch him and bring him in and deny him his medicine, and Mike emerges, and Mike's thought process is, shit, here I am, they've got me, well, I better give them what they want, but I'm not going to give them the whole thing. And his goal is to, it's somehow to get close to Bob. And I don't know why, I don't remember why their reasoning was for that, but that he wants to get close to Bob on his own. He doesn't want to lead the Coop and the sheriff to Bob. He needs to get close to him on his own. So he gets them to bring them to the Great Northern. Then he tries to escape from his bed, which is also a weird little moment. They never explain that in the series. Why is he trying to escape if he's supposedly helping their investigation? There's just like this whole, he's obviously on his own mission. His goal isn't really to help them find Bob. He's got his own. He wants to find Bob. And he knows who Bob is, if you believe Firewalk with Me.
Well, not only that, but
although actually, here's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Whenever he shows up in Firewalk with Me, it says Philip Gerard. He doesn't use the Mike voice when he's yelling at him in the traffic jam.
That's true.
I don't think he uses the Mike voice at the end when he's going through the woods. I don't know why that is either.
No, but he's speaking back.
He's like the most confusing character.
Yeah, and it's like the little man. Is the little man helping Cooper, or is he? I think he's trying to fuck him over. Because the all the clues about him trying to tell him about who killed Laura Palmer, well, all that does is bring Cooper closer to Bob.
Yeah, well, there's kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons reading of it, I guess. I think this is where it comes from. Of the Black Lodge is what's the word, orderly evil or something, and Bob is chaotic evil. So even though they're all evil, there's a system to it, and Bob is kind of defying it somehow. He's like a rogue spirit, and they're trying to keep him in line. So there's that. The thing that always kind of gets me about that reading, though, that sort of annoys me, is if it's too heavy on the mythology, I feel like you lose a lot of resonance with the human characters in Firewalk with Me, which is 90% of what the film is, For all the stuff, and this is another thing I was going to bring up, for all of, the Bob Engels interviews where he's always like, Mike and Bob are doing this with the ring and playing creamed corn and Eisenhower's table and all that stuff. There's really not that much of it in the film. The film is basically Laura Palmer's journey of, discovering who Bob is. And then...
Well, that's because they had a runtime. They had to get get down to 135 minutes.
But point being, even if they had a longer time, that still would have been the majority of the movie. That's the story they chose to tell.
Right.
So a lot of times I read these mythology-heavy readings of it, and they're like, the ring is just this bad thing, and Laura takes it. Laura's like a pawn in their game, and it's like, okay, if that's true, though, that doesn't really work as drama. Because you basically have these characters who, according to you, are puppets through the whole movie, and that's all they are. And then they, get used or they die, and we barely see the puppet masters in the movie. It's just not... It doesn't work as a story, And I think there's that element to it, but what always kind of keeps me thinking about it or going back to it and trying to figure out what's going on is how does it relate to the human characters, Believing, because obviously, the idea that it's all in Laura's head, that doesn't work. That's not how the movie's constructed. There's obviously a spirit world there, and they're obviously, interfering with the physical reality, and they have their own goals and stuff. But there has to be sort of some way where their actions relate to her psychological journey. And, Leland's too, to a certain extent. Because those are the main characters of the movie. That's just like, sort of drama 101. So I'm always kind of interested to go and look at it and figure out how does it relate back to the characters' arcs. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, like, so when I read that reading of, like, the Lodge, they're all evil and they're just Lara's their pawn and they're using the ring to say, you're our property now, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I kind of see where that's going, but I really do believe that Lynch would not have made Fire Walk with Me if the only point was to, like, establish the Lodge mythology of, like, how the Lodge functions, which he doesn't even really do in any clear way.
No, he cut most of it out.
I have to believe there was something more going on there that he wanted to sort of express or investigate about Laura as a character, and that there was some sort of growth that she experiences in the movie.
Well,
how that works, that's what you can spend forever trying to figure out, because it's so ambiguous in the movie, You see her reaction and you see what happens.
Well,
you don't really know what she did.
There's two things in Firewalk with Me that always strike me as funny. As
I may agree with this. Yeah.
Is Lynch is going very subtle to the point where he's not really explaining a lot, and most of it's pretty. You can pretty much follow what's going on,
right.
Especially if you've seen the series. It's pretty literal what's going on a lot of times. But the fact that he has to label Teresa Banks' body floating down the river,
yeah,
because otherwise people normally would have just thought Laura. So he has to say Teresa Banks. Yeah. And then the fact that when they say Garmonbozia, he has to put pain and sorrow in parentheses.
That's really interesting.
I mean, I'm
really interested.
I mean, because they didn't, they don't. When the finale, when the little man's saying doppelganger, they don't put the definition underneeth that.
Yeah, well, but to be fair, that's a real word.
No, I understand that.
versus
I know. I'm just saying.
Great as it is, yeah.
I'm just saying they didn't feel the need to explain that.
Yes. Yeah. No, I agree with you. That is an odd move on his part.
Because it's like if you're gonna say pain and sorrow, just have them say pain and sorrow.
Yeah.
And if you're gonna say Garmonbozia, like, make people check it out.
Yeah, he wants it to be both things at once. He wants it to be mythological and supernatural, and he also wants it to be psychological and spiritual and about the characters. So that, I think, any interpretation of Fire Walk with Me that actually like engages with it and makes sense of what it does, I think has to address both of those. It can't just say, oh, it's all in Laura's head and it's about that and, none of these creatures are real. And by the same token, you can't go to the other extreme and say, they're running the whole show. It's all about their power struggle, and Laura and Leland are just pawns in their game. Because that's kind of a big yawn, Okay, it's sort of.
And then there's this
all
other.
Right, I get it, but Lynch isn't token. There's something. There's obviously a psychodrama that's kind of central to this. So you have to figure out how the two elements interact, and I think that's key that he does label that, because it's like with all the stuff that he keeps ambiguous. He could just have them say Garmonbozia and have everyone be like, what the fuck? But instead, he says, by the way, he basically is telling the audience, I want you to know what these creatures are actually looking for. What they're feeding off of is the pain and sorrow of the human characters. And that kind of puts it into a more psychological realm right away. Now, you know what I mean?
Now, remember, a couple things. One is America is the only country that the Pink Room was subtitled. Everywhere else it wasn't.
Yeah, I know.
So
he went back and forth on that.
Yeah, and
there's you read Lynch on Lynch?
Yeah.
I think that's the one where he talks about, he's like, the guy says, I think it's Lynch on Lynch, the guy says to him, so what stupid distributor said that you had to subtitle? I love it not, and he's like, well, actually, that was my decision. I just couldn't make up my mind.
Right.
And like, he actually admits, he's like, I kept changing my mind. I thought maybe it should be, maybe it shouldn't be. But there was crucial info in there, so I wanted to subtitle it.
But you're talking about the two sides of like how people interpret the Laura Palmer's place in the mythology of Twin Peaks. And
sure, yeah.
The thing that drives me nuts are the people who are now going around saying that they think Cooper is the one responsible for killing Caroline and Laura and everybody else. That the
Wait,
black.
what?
Don't even get me started on this nonsense.
Okay, wait. I'm curious to hear how this works.
I don't even know how it works. I see people writing about that stuff, and I just click away because I'm like, no. There's not even a debate about this.
Like as a time warp thing, or?
Well, because it's implicated when when they're interrogating Leland. He says, remember that time in Pittsburgh, to insinuate that Bob was there when Cooper got stabbed.
Right. Well, he does say in the My Secret, My Life, My Tapes or whatever, he has like weird visions of Bob and stuff before he comes to Twin Peaks. And I don't know how,
Well, that is not canon.
That book has all kinds of problems as canon, considering the whole Deer Meadow thing, for one.
Exactly.
But yeah, they were working with that idea of like somehow he's experienced Bob in some vague way before.
And remember, in my interview,
I don't know how that makes him the killer of Laura.
Remember, in my interview with Jennifer Lynch, when I asked her, did you think he was going to adapt at least some of your diary into the movie?
Oh yeah, she had a great answer.
Her answer was, I don't think my dad ever read the diary.
Yeah. And
that's considered canon, Laura's diary.
Yeah.
And he never read it.
That's an interesting. I loved that little tidbit. I thought that was very interesting. And if you read the intros to the diary, they're kind of weird. Frost and Lynch. Lynch's is like one paragraph, and it's like, Jennifer Lynch wrote a great book about Twin Peaks. Enjoy. Like that's pretty much like all he says.
Right.
And then Frost is more about the show than the book, but that's a whole other subject anyways.
Exactly.
Well,
but I'm really interested in seeing what's going to happen on this 2016 series, and I'm sure we'll have you back many times to discuss everything.
Definitely.
I mean,
well, actually, before we go, I wanted to bring up one other thing.
Okay.
I'll kind of go back to one thing that we didn't finish. Did you have something else you were going to ask, or?
No, go ahead.
Okay. When we were talking about the Fire Walk With Me thing and whether Lynch regrets that, or does he think it was a mistake to reveal the killer and all of that, do you know, was he ever on record before Fire Walk With Me saying it was a mistake?
No.
The only thing I've heard where, other than him saying that, in the intro to The Secret Diary, Frost says Lynch always said it was a mistake, or David always said it was a mistake, and now I agree with him.
A mistake of what?
And he says, to end Laura's mystery. And he says, I wish I had the exact quote in front of me, but he says, Mark Frost basically says David Lynch always thought it was a mistake. And then he says something like, we let the network get to us and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, wait a second. If he always thought it was a mistake, what? So it was like, did he think it was a mistake as he was doing it? Like what? And what role? Because they were partners, I don't think you could just come to David Lynch and say, guess what, we're revealing the killer. Tough shit. Like, he had to approve on some level, even if he didn't like it. But I would just love to go in like a time machine and figure out how that actually worked. Did somebody else suggest it? Did Frost consider it and say, listen, David, let's go sit down to lunch. I really think this is what we should do, and here's why. And, like, was Lynch like, all right, or like, what happened?
Well,
how did that decision get made? Because I've never heard a great explanation of that.
I will say this though: if they think it was a mistake, if the network made them solve the murder, okay,
right?
To me, and this is just me talking.
Yeah,
I think it's one of the best mistakes in television history.
I know what you mean.
Because when you watch it, especially, I would say, the 2 episodes before episode 14 all the way to, like, say, 16, you never feel for 1 second like the network is forcing them to solve this. I
feel that way with 16. I do feel that way with that, but the ones before I don't at all.
It naturally...
14, not even slightly.
The story just unfolds, It doesn't feel like crammed in there. It feels like, well, that's just the way. I don't know. It's just, to me, it's like, if it was a mistake, they don't acknowledge in the making of the show and the feel of the show that it was a mistake.
And here's the thing. Let's be honest about this. If they really had never revealed the killer, or if they had kept it off Maybe if they had revealed it eventually, but if they had never revealed it, first of all, putting aside the fact that my favorite parts of Twin Peaks are Episode 14, Episode 29, and Firewalk with Me, which are all impossible if you don't reveal the killer. So putting that aside, if they just hadn't revealed it and they'd still had great seasons, which total impracticality. They were never going to get away with that. The show would have been canceled after probably halfway through season 2.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be real about it. But even putting that aside, artistically, is it really such a great thing to have this mystery of Laura Palmer in which the whole point is, okay, Laura suffered horribly and these characters, they're all in the periphery. They don't really know what she went through, but they're all kind of hurting from it. And, you're digging into it. To actually never find out anything, I don't think it would be. I think that would be kind of a cop-out, and I think the show is much more interesting for us to find out and to then have to grapple with that and work through that in the film and the series.
Well,
I think that's a way more compelling direction to go in.
Right. It opens up so many possibilities.
Perpetuity. Yes, exactly.
And also, how many Harold Smiths can you really bring out to be like, you didn't know the whole story about Laura Palmer? It's like, believe me, the world is tired of Laura Palmer. If they had gotten episode 29 and we still didn't know what the hell was going on, I mean, people were pissed that they didn't know after episode 7.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's just the practical point. And I think we're both totally in agreement that they weren't going to get away with it forever. It just wasn't going to happen.
Mm-mm.
But even if they could have, even in an ideal world, I don't think that would have been as interesting of a show. I think the most interesting, when they cut to the Palmer household and you see Leland looking in the mirror and he sees Bob, that changes the show completely, and it makes it a much deeper, more interesting, and more disturbing show. If they had just kept the mystery going forever, okay, great, fine. But that's not nearly as compelling as what they did. Now, the mistake they made, to my opinion, they didn't build off that at all. If they had, again, Monday morning quarterbacking, we can all do it. So, to be fair. But the idea that, you have this major reveal and you sort of rip the surface off and you're showing there's this whole strange world outside of Twin Peaks. First of all, there's this spirit world that, we don't really understand how it works, but there's something way more going on here. And then on top of that, saying that, the Laura Palmer mystery or the Laura Palmer murder or whatever was partly a result of incest. That's something really troubling as well. So they're bringing up all these aspects, and then they just ignore them. They go forward and they say, okay, now we're off to do something else. And eventually they bring Wyndham Earle, and then finally they get back to it. But that, I think, was a mistake, because you can end the question of who killed Laura Palmer without ending the Laura Palmer mystery. And I think that's what they're going to do in 2016. Yeah, we know who killed her, but that mystery leads to so much more. And, if you don't lose sight of where it all began, I think you can keep it going forever. And in that sense, okay, I get that. But the idea that we shouldn't have known who killed her, I think that's a mistake. I don't know why they keep harping on that. And I don't really get, like you said, I don't get how somebody who could make Firewalk with Me and passionately make it, and whether or not he's had second doubts, I kind of don't think so. I think he's been pretty firm on that, and I think if anything, the failure maybe made him even more stubborn about thank God, that was the right move to make. Almost more defensive about it. But whether or not that's the case, there was something passionately driving him to make that movie. I don't get how the person who's passionately driven to make that movie also thinks that we should have never found out Leland Palmer killed Laura, with Bob or whatever. It makes no sense to me. I don't get it.
The other aspect to this is Firewalk with Me is considered by many to be one of the great films to deal with the subject of incest. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now,
what a pity to have lost that, in my opinion.
Here's the thing, though.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying I think this. I am just...
Right.
I'm proposing this as a conversation piece, real quick.
Mm-hmm.
By saying Bob is real and part of this Black Lodge or Lodge, whatever it is. I don't know if they're in the Black Lodge or the White Lodge or wherever they are. To say that Bob is real lets potentially lets Leland off the hook for all the things he did because it was Bob who did it.
Major conversation point.
So if you have Leland raping his daughter since she was 12, but you're saying it was really Bob, then and the fact that Leland comes in at the end of the finale and says, "I did not kill anybody," that's like Lynch saying that Leland himself is innocent and that Bob is the one responsible. Okay, we get that. Well, however, does that mean...
That's the whole thing with episode 16, you know? That's what makes that episode, to me, one of the things that makes it so problematic is that it presents it that way. And then, but keep going, yes and no, because at the end, Albert does say this thing which, drives some people nuts and some people about the evil that men do. Okay, to me... that was a perfect explanation that Bob was the personification of evil in the Palmer family of what they saw. Right.
Okay, but now to say that Bob is real, I'm almost wondering, is that
worse?
Is that worse? Because in a way, it's almost like saying, well, Leland is completely absolved.
Devil made him do it.
Yeah. This actual demon possession made him do it. And does that get Leland off the hook? And
Yeah, no, I mean that's a great question. I actually just had that conversation on the DUGPA, the Twin Peaks forum, because I did an interview with Martha. I'm gonna pronounce her name right, Nachemson, who wrote about Lynch, and I asked her about that. I'm like, well. Because she loves episode 16, even though it's not a Lynch episode. She just felt like it really captured something, the spirit of the show.
Well, Tim Hunter's a great director.
Yeah, I mean, you had him reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead and all of that. But I asked her, I'm like, well, what do you think about the fact that, they're basically, it's sort of ambiguous in episode 14, but in 16, and you raise a good point that, Albert says that, but there are all these little, or strong hints that, it is a demon possessing him, and he's totally helpless, and he's just the innocent victim. And she was like, oh, well, actually, I never asked... that did make me uncomfortable now that you mentioned it, and I never asked Lynch if he was uncomfortable about it as well. So somebody reading that was kind of like, how could she not ask him? We sort of got into all that stuff you're addressing right now of, like, what does it mean? What does the Bob thing mean? So
it doesn't make me uncomfortable. It doesn't make me uncomfortable in the series. It makes me uncomfortable when I'm dealing with the film.
Really interesting, because I know what you're saying. Because when I saw the series, it didn't. But I think that was only because at that point I was so shocked by the Leland reveal that I wanted him to just be possessed by a demon.
Now
so
I'm not saying
okay, all right, that's good. But then when I saw the film, it wouldn't let me. I felt like it wouldn't let me off with that excuse. And then what annoyed me was, okay, so the film is really, pushing the idea that Leland was abusive. You have to me, the turning point was the wash your hands scene.
Right,
I remember when I first watched the film, I was like settling in, like, oh, this is going to be great. Laura Palmer started, and I saw that scene, and I was like, well, this is a way more serious film than I thought it was going to be, and I'm cool with that. I can go on that journey, but if they're going to take me on that journey, do I really want them throwing in this other stuff about, Bob and the man from another place, or is that now a distraction from that? And that was kind of what I grappled with the first time I saw the movie. Now, on repeat viewings and like thinking about it and talking about it, I think actually what works for me about it is and this is what I think Lynch is doing. It'll be interesting to see in the new series what direction he goes in. I think the reason that he keeps the supernatural stuff, even though he's highlighting the psychological and social aspects too, is he wants it to be a bigger, more cosmic story as well. So in other words, he's saying, yes, Leland is definitely responsible for abusing Lauren, for killing her, and he knows what he's doing because he has that line about, I always thought you knew it was me. And then you have Bob coming in from the other side and he says, I never knew you knew it was me. And what that says to me is that, yes, Leland is responsible for what he does, but at least within this world, there is a larger evil force. It isn't just the story of Laura and her dad. It's the story of her and her dad, which represents also this larger struggle between good and evil, like a cosmic struggle in this world, in this film. So I think, and this is, again, my reading of it, and the new series could change it, and that might be something that, ends up pissing me off. I think it's the one thing they could do that would piss me off, is if they made it sort of what you're talking about, where it's totally letting him off the hook and Devil Made Me Do It. But my reading of it is the purpose of the film is sort of double-pronged. On the one hand, to say, wait a second, don't forget the fact that he did this to her and he is the one who did it and he's responsible for it. And at the same time, don't forget that it isn't just him. There is a larger evil that he allowed to infect him, and that isn't just coming from within him, but coming from without. And I think that's fairly consistent with Lynch's spiritual philosophy, which is you're responsible for your actions, you have choices to make, your basic struggles are internal, which is what is the case in all of his films, Eraserhead, Mulholland Drive, whatever. But there are larger forces at work. You're responsible for what you're doing, but you're part of a larger struggle. So that, and again, maybe it's just rationalization, but that's kind of where I see him going with that. And that, for me, is why Fire Walk with Me is a little more compelling in that depiction than the episode. Because even though Albert says that, the way it's played, to me, plays very much like The Exorcist. You know what I mean? So, anyways, that's my 2 cents, but I don't know if you had another...
my only thing is that Leland is a complete kook throughout the whole movie. And then when you watch the series, everyone's like, Leland's the nicest guy, and there was I didn't see any build up to Laura's death. It's like, well, obviously I didn't talk to those guys at the auto mechanic shop when he was screaming at them. No one came forward and said Leland was acting very strange that day.
Yeah, that always occurred to me. It's like those guys, Cooper should have talked to those guys when he was investigating it. But I think to be fair, that's a rare moment because you have Mike / Philip / the one-armed man coming out of nowhere, which, again, like I said, I think the people summon him sometimes, or summon, the lodge spirits with their own emotional, psychological states. I think the one-armed man comes to him in that scene, aside from the function of, waving the ring and talking about Garmin Bosia, I think he's also pulled in because Leland's just had this weird, guilty moment of being reminded of seeing his daughter with Renette, when he walks in the room and he sees them there and he has that weird flash.
Right.
To me, that's the trigger that causes the whole thing with the one-armed man. And I think everything in Fire Walk with Me you can look at sort of literally, and you can also look at it as a psychodrama. And again, I'm not saying it's all in her head because it doesn't, the Chet Desmond stuff and all that makes no sense if that's the case. Like, what are they doing there? But I think it all works on an allegorical level too. I guess I put it that way.
Well, one thing's for sure.
I think the whole thing with the traffic scene, it's basically like a physical representation of what's going on in his head and in Laura's head too, as she begins to suspect that he's Bob. And I think that's how that scene plays. Now I read people talking about it and they're like, this is Philip Gerard telling Bob he found the can of Garmin. It's like, okay, I get that. That's part of it. But is that really the most compelling aspect of that scene? I don't think so.
Well, I was saying,
the visceral, the feeling of it, which is all about the father and the daughter kind of sharing a secret and also keeping secrets from each other, and that bursting out into the open right there. So I don't even remember how we got onto that, but
well,
that's my take on it.
I was just going to say one thing is for sure, that whole sequence in the missing pieces of those series of phone calls of Teresa Banks calling Leland and talking about blackmailing him.
Oh, yeah.
That needed to be in the film.
Wasn't it sort of in the film, though?
No.
Isn't there something where... I'm trying to remember, like, what's actually in the movie?
Nothing.
I know. Jacques Renault says, he tells them in the pink room
right.
that she was going to blackmail him, and that's
it. That's it.
Yeah, we never see her call. That's so weird. I'm already starting to think of the missing pieces. Even though I think of it as such a distinct entity from Fire Walk with Me, I'm already starting to blur them together in my mind.
Well, there's
like to the point where
there's a handful of them that really needed to be in the film, and I could probably. Yeah. Okay, listen, I got to wrap this podcast up, but one thing. But definitely, I want to say this. If Lynch only had 2 hours and 15 minutes for the film, right?
Yeah.
and he had to lose, I think a few very, very important scenes in the missing pieces, and there's a few other, there's a lot of extraneous stuff, but there's a few, like I say, like maybe 5 or 6 scenes that probably should have been a contender
to 2.5 hours.
Well, he couldn't have done that, but here's what I would have done, and maybe some people would hate me because this would X out some people's favorite parts, I guess. But if I was Lynch and this was going to happen, and I was going to lose out on the Doc Hayward scene and stuff like that, I would have, since it had no tie to anything, I would have cut out the whole Deer Meadow scene and just made the whole thing Laura's story.
Well, that would be, I think that was something I almost kind of wanted the first time I saw it, and the Deer Meadow stuff has grown on me. But I go back and forth. It's like, I'm not against it. I'm saying if you have to play with time, in and of itself, but I'd rather have 30 more minutes of the Laura stuff than dealing with a story that literally goes nowhere. Well, I guess that's the point. And to play devil's advocate, or I guess parrot what I've heard. People have made interesting arguments that the whole point of that is, and I think this works better if you view it as a part of the series than as a standalone film, but it's sort of the last stop on the investigative route. Like, we followed the whole series from an investigative perspective. We have Cooper, we have the FBI, they'll get to the bottom of this, and that's like the point where you're just like, look at this. They're getting nowhere, they're not going to get anywhere, and they can't reach that ring. They don't know what that means. That's the mystery they can't access. Now we're going to take you to the person who can, and then we go to Laura Palmer. So I'm sort of two minds about it. I kind of agree with you that it doesn't quite belong there, and it isn't as well integrated as the dual narrative stuff in like Lost Highway or Mulholland Drive. It sticks out a little more, even though I think he's working towards that kind of approach. On the other hand, there is a really interesting kind of dynamic at play there.
Oh, I'm not saying it shouldn't be in the film.
But if he had to choose... No, I know what you mean. Yeah, why not make the Laura Palmer part stronger and play up your trump card instead of sticking to the two stories?
I'm saying if you had to make the choice, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I may have... I may have shortened the Deer Meadows scene to maybe 15 minutes instead of 30. If you're going to do that at all.
As long as they keep Harry Dean Stanton, then I'm okay. As long as we get that moment where the lady with the ice pack shows up and he says, what does he say? I've already been places. I just want to stay where I am. That's the one moment. You could almost just open the movie with that scene and then cut to Laura Palmer, and I can live with it.
It's funny, though, because in 92, when the movie came out, people either wanted the whole movie to be Laura Palmer, or
I've still read that today,
or they wanted the other thing and have the whole 2 hours be the Chris Isaac, Kiefer Sutherland show.
Deer Meadow, yeah.
So you can't really win. But anyway, this has been a wonderful discussion. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, this was great.
And hopefully, like I said, hopefully you'll come back on and do this again.
We'll discuss the new series at some point eventually. I guess we got to wait another year? Is it airing in April? Like, is it literally airing 25 years after
Nobody
the finale?
knows. Nobody knows. 2016. That's all we know.
Yeah.
But
I was wrong last time. You said, "How's Annie?" and I said, "We'll never know." Apparently, now we will.
Hopefully, I really hope Heather Graham.
That was my answer last time.
I really want Heather Graham back, big time.
We'll find out. I'm sure we will. That's my new. I was wrong last time, but this time I'm right. We'll find out about Annie.
And we will find out, what Lynch's style for this is going to be. Is he going to ape the Twin Peaks style, or is he going to go, or is he going to go Inland Empire?
Well, apparently he's now back into 35 millimeter after the missing pieces. Like, there's all these quotes.
Yeah, but there are. I would be shocked if this new series was shot in film.
It would be unusual, but then, if as unusual as it was for him to shoot on a PD-150 in 2006,
right,
it would almost be as unusual for him to shoot on 35 millimeter today.
Well, it's not even that. It's not just that. It's just TV shows on Showtime are all HD.
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. That's why it would be so. It would be almost as radical as doing what he did with Inland Empire 10 years ago, which almost makes me think he is gonna do it.
All right. Here's my last question for you.
Yeah.
Now we know from Mark Frost's words that this new series is going to serve as a conclusion and also one with some questions posed, right? That's what he has said. However,
you don't think there'll be any more after?
Well, this is done as a limited series like Fargo and stuff like that. So
do you think they'll do another limited series in 2 or 3 years?
Well, no, what I'm saying though is that do you think this is the intention, this is a limited series, but do you think if the reception is great, if it is as wonderful as we hope this is, do you see Twin Peaks going further on Showtime than it ever did on ABC? Do you think we'll get season 5, season 6 on Showtime? Or do you think Lynch and Frost do it, wipe their hands, and walk away?
I don't think they'll cleanly wipe their hands, because I think Lynch especially is always in love with the idea of an ongoing story that never ends. I think my guess would be they'll at least leave the option open, and they may come back and do more, but I think they'll always be limited run series, which I think is right. And I don't want to second. I love the whole warts and all series, and you wouldn't have the best stuff if they didn't make the mistakes like we've already established. That being said, at heart, I think Twin Peaks was always a limited run series. It's more like a long form movie in a way than an ongoing series where we check in on the subplots. And when they tried to do this as a TV series, it didn't quite jibe, and they had to go back and kind of return to their roots. So I think yes, I think we will see more Twin Peaks after this if all prayers to heaven or whatever. If they keep going and 80-year-old Lynch and 70-year-old Frost or whatever are still kicking. I think every few years we could see more Twin Peaks if they're on the same page. But I don't think anything will be foreclosed by it. I don't think it's going to end in like, this is absolutely officially the end of Twin Peaks, it's over. But I think however it continues, it'll be in little 9-episode bursts like this, and I think that's the perfect form for it. I think that's the form it always wanted.
I just worry that the ending of this new series will be even
Not
more, to drive people more nuts than Cooper is Bob.
I think that's a reasonable expectation, and I think that's
it's going to end with Laura being reborn or something into the world, or something.
Well, even that would almost be like a nice little thing. I think it's going to probably end. I don't think it'll be as much of a gut punch as that, honestly, because they've always said that was supposed to be a season ending. We didn't want to leave people that, stranded. But I absolutely think they will end with a sense of mystery remaining. That's the one thing I can say. If they pose something, if there's a new murder mystery, and I almost kind of hope it isn't a murder mystery, because that would feel a little repetitive, but there's got to be obviously some sort of mystery. I think there'll be some sort of solution within the series, but it's not going to be a conclusive solution. It's going to be just enough of one to feel like it's not a cop-out, but also tantalizing and frustrating enough to be like, the mystery remains, because that's what he always wanted.
Right.
Even though I can't figure it out, like I said, even though I can't square that circle, he said it, and I believe him.
Right.
That he wanted the mystery to go on forever, and I think when this series ends, there will still be. I don't know how it'll work exactly, but that's the one thing I feel comfortable saying is there will still be a sense of mystery and not knowing open at the end of these 9 episodes.
And as long as people still care about this mystery and enjoy listening to these podcasts, I'll keep doing them. People seem to really enjoy me and my co-host talking about Twin Peaks, so it's fun to do. But seriously, Joel, thank you so much for.
Hopefully, you get some more of the great interviews with the cast members and stuff, because that was really great stuff.
That's the intention. My the next person on my radar is hopefully I can't really tell you, but I it's somebody that we've never heard really talk about Twin Peaks, and I want to get them on the record. So hopefully that will work out. So.
Oh, that's intriguing. Okay.
Yeah. All right, but
I
anyway,
think it's not Ray Wise.
no, it's definitely not him. He's talked too much.
Yeah.
I love you, Ray. Anyway,
All right, sounds great.
Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we will see you next time. Take care.